Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Chris Varcoe with the Calgary Herald, joined by Don Braid. Don, in the past week, we saw the by-election in Calgary Foothills. The results come in, and maybe no surprise here, but the Wildrose, Prashad Panda, defeated the Progressive Conservatives by Blair Houston and Bob Hawksworth, the NDP candidate. What do you think people should be taking out of this victory for the Wildrose?
That's a really bad result for the NDP. They were elected 4 months ago. They are the government. They ran an extremely high-profile candidate in Bob Hawksworth with all kinds of credentials, and they got clobbered. They almost got matched by the PCs. Some people say, well, don't take it too seriously. It doesn't mean anything for the government because they're in for another 4 years. But what does it mean politically? It means that they don't really own Calgary anymore. They had their bubble. If they had held this maybe a month, 6 weeks after the election, they would have probably won it. But now things are a lot shakier for them in this city, and this city is very important. They have 14 MLAs, and they need every one of them.
So for the government, obviously a setback. Let's talk about what this means for the Wildrose, though. It seems to me that this maybe sets aside any sort of talk, at least for the time being, of uniting the right, because if I'm Brian Jean of the Wildrose Party, I don't know why I would even engage in conversations with the Conservatives right now.
Well, Wildrose is strong enough that they feel they can absorb the PCs without going through any formal process. The PCs are strong enough that they feel they won't be absorbed. I mean, 22% of the vote isn't bad, considering that Jim Prentice walked out on that riding 4 months ago. So it's kind of sets aside for a while the whole merger talk. Although you'd have to say that the edge in all of this really goes to Wildrose. They were extremely strong there. They didn't hold a single seat in either of the big cities, although they have some surrounders in Calgary. But that was an extremely important symbolic victory for them.
Back to the business of government, the NDP now have to, I guess, start to put together their budget plan for sometime in late October, early November. And a lot of discussion in recent weeks and recent days has really centered around the size of the deficit, number one, and number two is an economic stimulus package. What do you think the discussions are going on right now in that NDP caucus?
Well, the understanding is, the suggestion is that the Dodge report may be done already, and that it may recommend some stimulus spending, and the NDP may be willing to consider that stimulus spending. What's in the report, I don't know. But the NDP may well be considering just saying to the public, look, we're going to have to go further into debt for this. We're going to try and reboot this economy with some important infrastructure spending and spend more on infrastructure.
Borrowing to make an investment in infrastructure which will yield a return that you can attribute direct return that you can measure directly, I think is absolutely appropriate, always appropriate to do that in the private sector. It's appropriate to do it in the public sector as well. They have to decide how much they want to listen to the alarms and excursions that happen almost daily from the Wildrose and the right side of the Wildrose about every penny spent as a disaster. They don't believe that, and in the end, they may just simply decide to ignore that.
I guess this is a calculation on whether the public is willing to accept more debt, or more deficit rather, considering the fact that the government's already warned that they may be looking at a $6.5 billion deficit if oil prices don't improve.
Well, yeah, but then again, the public's going to have to swallow it because they're in for another 3 years, and they can always hope for the old PC bounce of higher oil prices, and they may get them.
Lastly, we saw some news last week of the political pay packets for senior members in Rachel Notley's office. What did you think about those numbers that came out?
I thought they're on the right track. Redford's spending was absurd. I mean, communications director making $199,000, chief of staff making almost $400,000. They were ridiculous numbers. Prentice took them down. Jim Prentice worked hard on that aspect, and he cut spending by 5%. Some of the top people got a lot less. And basically, when they announced their packages, we're still higher than other provinces, a lot higher than BC, actually, but it's a lot lower than it was before, so at least they're going in the right direction with salaries like Brian Topp, the chief of staff, making about $250 rather than almost $400.
Let's turn our attention to the winners and losers of the past week. Who was your winner?
Well, I'd have to give it to Shannon Phillips, who not only is starting to talk more about what the status of women portfolio really means, and bringing out institutional support for that from the universities and so forth, but also the Castle Wilderness thing last week. It's not surprising. The NDP's always said protect the Castle Wilderness.
They campaigned on it in the main election.
They campaigned on it. They won partly on that, but the PCs who always resisted. They always had a reason not to go ahead and do the full protection, and even they, after it was announced, said not so bad.
So what about your loser of the week?
Oh, poor old Bob Hawksworth. Here's a guy, 15 years on city council, 2 terms as an NDP MLA. He missed the bus back in May. If he'd run, he would have won. Absolutely no question.
Longtime
about it.
NDP supporter and an NDP MLA at one point.
Absolutely. In the 80s, he was an NDP MLA for 2 terms from Calgary yet. So we had all the credentials. They had everything going for him except the public, unfortunately.
And he ends up losing, and as you say, a big loss for the government.
No kidding. Yeah, it really is. It's symbolic, political, but nonetheless very important.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.